Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to another episode of More Than Pixels on a Screen, a spoilerific podcast brought to you by the Banterflix movie review website. This episode, we're going to be talking about Ty West's Pearl. It was released in cinemas a few weeks ago. Getting a chance to talk about it now. And I had to send out the feelers for two horror-loving fans to join me on this discussion. We had them on recently to talk about Scream 6, so we had to have them back by public demand, by Sharon Stone's own demand. So once again, I'm joined by Nicole Hamilton. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
And I'm joined by John Kavanagh.
Thanks for having me again, and I hope it's not Billy that brought me back.
No, I will be honest, Sharon didn't mention you. I don't know, maybe she didn't like your theories about Scream 6, or your theories about Scream 7. If you haven't listened to that pod, go back and listen to it. John has a lot of theories about what's going to happen. We'll not talk about them because we're talking about Pearl on this pod. The kind of pseudo-prequel. It is a prequel, but pseudo-prequel. It's trying to do its own thing to X. It was out last year. It was kind of a very much kind of love letter to the kind of Texas Chainsaw era of horror in the 70s and the kind of growth of the porn industry. Now we go back to 1918 in a world that seems so strange that we can relate to. We have a pandemic. We have a world war. Just seems completely out of place. But we have Mia Goth returning this time to play the younger version of Pearl, who some people didn't realise that she was playing both roles in X. We're going to be talking about the film. As we always say, we will be talking about it in spoilers, so Nicole, you can be free from worry. I know you were concerned the last time we had you on. We've all been to see the film. We're sitting down to have our pints, our soft drinks, or our non-alcoholic drinks, whatever is so often, or a cup of tea. I can see you both, kind of tea or coffee, whatever you're going with. This is just an informal chat about the movie, but without any further ado, let's play a clip of Pearl.
I'm worried there may be something real wrong with me, Mitzi. Whenever I see others whose lives come easy, because the truth is I'm not really a good person. I'm not pretty, or naturally pleasant, or friendly. I know what I've done. The bad things. Terrible, awful, murderous things. Do you think I'm sick?
No, but Pearl,
Please. Don't lie to me.
So that's a clip of the film. John, I'm going to come to you first. So this is kind of Ty West. I mean, people might be familiar with X. They might be familiar. I suppose The Innkeepers would be, I think, his most well-known horror. I don't know. I mean, I'm familiar with a couple of his films. Is it The House of the Devil? Which I am a fan of as well. We have that. Then last year was X, which I've kind of alluded to as this kind of throwback to kind of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre era, the growth of the horror industry, the start of the kind of porn industry kind of taking off, and it was cheap and cheerful to make, and that's why we got so many of these. And I liked X when it was out. I really did. A lot of it was down to Mia Goth, who I think is an absolutely fantastic performer. Now we have even more. Well, we don't have even more Goth because last time we had two. This time we have her much front and centre of the franchise as the aforementioned Pearl, who we've seen kind of aged up behind prosthetics in the first film. We have her back as her younger self and her pursuit for stardom and slightly weird kind of sociopathic homicidal tendencies. But generally, were you a fan, John, of X when it was released last year?
I was a fan of X. It's a film that seems to be tailor-made for me, like a mashup between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Boogie Nights that just ticks every box for me. I don't know if it left much of a lasting impression, but it was a great experience as I was going through it.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. You know, I've just actually realised we have Jenna Ortega. I always forget Jenna Ortega's in that film, and she's great in this bloody film. We talked about her before with Scream 6, and so she's here. So yeah, I was a fan of X, and I was intrigued by Pearl. I know we're going to have Maxine, I think, out next year. God knows it'll probably be, this year in the States, and we'll have to wait for months like we did with Pearl for this one. But for yourself, Nicole, were you a fan of X when it was released?
I did like it quite a bit. Whenever I watched it, it was right after all of the hype surrounding it had kind of hit its peak. So I was expecting something really, really revolutionary and got a very good slasher. So I liked it. I didn't love it. I rewatched it actually just before going to the cinema to see Pearl, and liked it more actually a second time round. Still don't love it. It's like a 3.5-ish for me out of 5.
That's still a positive.
But I enjoy it, and I would watch it again. I had a good time with it.
Yeah, I think it's all. I think it does some interesting things. I'll come back to this with Pearl. What I like about it is the fact that it's a horror film. There's layers there. There's stuff that's going on. I know the last time we were talking about Scream, we were kind of saying, all these interesting things that we wish the film was dabbling with. It's not interested with. Both X and Pearl, I think even more so Pearl, has more things going on than not just more than just standard slasher stuff, which I have no problem with. I enjoy that. And John, I come back to yourself, and I'll come back to yourself as well, Nicole. But first and foremost, generally, are you a fan of Ty West's back catalogue? I've mentioned a few of his previous films. As I said, The Innkeepers was probably the one that I remember. Then there's The House of the Devil, which I enjoyed, didn't love, but I thought it was solid. But are you a fan of Ty West's back catalogue?
Honestly, X and Pearl were my first real experience with him.
Okay.
So I went on very fresh, not knowing any of his work, knew of the work, just never got a chance to see it. And I think what I've seen so far has been very on the nose. It's a very explicit theology of films. And I think Maxine's probably going to be similar, where it's going to be very explicit in its themes and stuff. But again, I don't know much about his back catalogue to comment on it.
Okay, intrigued. Nicole, yourself?
I watched The House of the Devil a good few years ago now. It was on Prime at some stage. And I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't love the last act. I thought it went a bit too cuckoo for me. Generally, I love cuckoo, but that particular brand of it just didn't hit what I wanted it to. But the rest of it, I loved the build up. I like The Innkeepers a lot as well. But I haven't seen any of his other films. I was looking on through his filmography earlier just to see what else he had done. And I'm not familiar with anything else that he's ever done. So a fan, but not a huge fan.
Yeah, I mean, he's someone you definitely get the sense he's cine literate, and in the sense he clearly is a fan of the horror genre. That can sometimes be a positive. It sometimes can be a negative. I do think I said at the time when we reviewed X on the TV show, we had James Oliver on. Actually, James reviewed both this, and he reviewed X and Pearl on the TV show. He was not a fan of either. At the time, I was depressed, and I know James listens to the pod, so I will be kind, but I know his central problem with X, or one of the main problems with X, was that it was old people having sex. And you're like, well, that happens. Old people have sex, okay? We've just got to get over it. But coming back to what I said, I mean, I love the fact that there was stuff going on. It wasn't just all surface. Because sometimes you can get films, they look beautiful, they look stylish, they have all the nods in the world. They are style, but oh, what style, but they are wafer thin. This had much more going for it. And yeah, I love the throwbacks to Texas Chainsaw, because that's a film I love, and it's all about the tension rather than the gore. Because there isn't any real gore in Texas Chainsaw. It's all about the tension. That's where the problems come. I don't want to allow us to get too bogged down talking about X, but I guess it's impossible in this new trilogy not to compare and contrast. So now we have Pearl, as I've mentioned, going back to 1918. We see Mia Goth coming back to the role, and we see, in this sense, we have someone who feels that she's stuck in her place. She's stuck caring for her father. She's got a very dictatorial mother, kind of Carrie-esque in that sense, of a mother who's very overbearing and knows what her daughter should be doing. We have a husband that's gone off to war. She's frustrated, sexually frustrated as well. She's, looking to do new things. She meets a projectionist that we'll come back to, I'm sure, when we're discussing the film, who kind of opens up new senses of desire for herself. So there's a lot going on with her. It's not just, woman goes on rampage and kills. And that's why I like it. That's one of the things I'll say right from the get-go. I really like Pearl. I don't know if I like it as much as X. I think the fact I've seen X a good few times because I think it's available on Prime as well now, so I've watched it a couple of times. Pearl, I'm going to be honest for the first time, and it's going to think. I've seen Pearl in the cinema, but I might have given in to dodgy internet ways because I've mentioned this earlier, there's been this huge delay in the film being released in the States and getting it here. I just wanted to watch it, and I'm going to blame Amazon Prime. It's Amazon's Prime's fault. They put X out, and it's like, I want Pearl, I really want to watch it now. And I know Joe McElroy, he has waited and went to see it in cinema. I think Joe liked it. I couldn't give in. I'm weak-willed. And I gave in to the desires of the illegal internet world and watched Pearl. But, Ty, don't worry if you're listening. I did pay to go see it in the cinema as well. And I enjoyed it. So, coming back to yourself, John, because I think in listening to you when we were talking before this episode, you're not as positive about this film as I am.
Just like the Legacy sequel, I'm not a big fan of prequels either. I think they have a lot of expectations on their shoulders, and it's very hard to reach those expectations. Also, I'm happy enough with the narrative presented in the film. I don't really need to see its origins and stuff, but that's going beyond the point. I was actually, whenever X first came out, I had COVID, so I missed it, and I had to wait a while to watch it. I ended up having to watch it much later on through means which may be similar to your own. Questionable. And then I may have done this around the time Pearl was coming out in the States, so I may have done that too. So I watched them very close together for the first time. I don't feel they connect as much as a prequel should. Do you get what I mean?
But I actually think that's a real positive. I think the fact that, because and again, I know I go off on rants, regular listeners will know this, and I go off on rambles, and people wonder, I go off on tangents upon tangents. It's like Inception. Whose tangent are we in now? I like you have a problem with prequels because you already know your finishing point, and then you've got to go back, and you've got that hurdle of making that journey interesting. 9 out of 10 times, it's not, because the peril isn't there, the risk isn't there. I'm trying to think of, like, the one that comes to mind always is like the Han Solo prequel for Star Wars. It's like, oh, will they make the Kessel Run? Yeah, they will, because he fucking boasts about it in Star Wars 4, Force Awakens. He boasts about it in New Hope. So don't have that as a central thrust of your narrative. You can go off and you can do things with these characters and make it interesting. That's kind of one of the things I liked about what Ty West has done. And let's say right from the get-go, Mia Goth is involved here in a screenplay capacity as well. I'd love to know, maybe you've both done more research than I have. I'd love to know in terms of what that actually distilled down to, in the sense of, has she just tried to flesh out the character of Pearl? Has she tried to flesh out kind of what happens within the narrative? Because it's a prequel, but I'm going to say it's a pseudo-prequel because it's taken those characters, but it's not taken us to the events of X. There's a massive amount of time has passed between these two films, and there's awfully clearly a good bit of killing has still to take place, and whether or not this trilogy could become a quadrilogy, he'll decide he wants to go back and do more of Pearl's story. I don't know. Ty, if you're...
The way it links is, my main issue with this, both of the films do two things very distinctly and very strongly, and that's where the disconnect comes for me. Like X is very much a strongly thematic film. It knows what it wants to tell you, it knows what it wants to present, and it examines that very well. The death of youth, the slow encroach of age, and the horrors that result from that. They become literal in the film, but they're very explicit subtextually. But Pearl, for me, is more of an aesthetic experience. It's more about an exploration of form and style, more so than theme and content. So it feels to me like they're just too distinct to really connect, even with the same thing.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's an interesting point that you make, and at this point, Nicole, we bring yourself in. I mean, we haven't really asked you yet your thoughts on Pearl. Are you a fan of this film?
I think I'd like. Well, I've only seen it the once. But
How dare you? How dare you only come on this podcast and watch a film once? How dare you?
I had a good time with it. I think I enjoyed the ride of it slightly more than I did X on my first viewing of X anyway. Um, I I have a couple of issues with it. I don't think that it's as interesting as it thinks it is, but I also thought that about X. Um, but to John's point actually about it being more of a kind of cinematic experience about the how the film was made and everything like that. I actually think that's in keeping. I did not intend that to be an innkeeper's pun, but I think that is in keeping with Ty West's what I've seen of Ty West's filmography in general. The House of the Devil is very much that kind of homage to. I would say probably specifically John Carpenter, but that early 80s horror aesthetic, satanic panic, all that kind of thing. So I think Pearl is actually more in line with the things that he's done previously than X is, from my awareness anyway. But I do enjoy it. I find it to be a pretty wild ride. Like I was clutching my friend's arm in the cinema, not out of fear or anything, but I was saying to John earlier, I was just like wanting to shout at these characters just to be like, just leave, get out of there, move, do something other than just slowly walk away from the crazed woman with the axe. And so
when will people learn? When will people learn?
I know.
Number one rule is get the fuck out of there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, coming back to your point, I mean, this film is a love letter to the kind of golden era of Hollywood. If X was kind of looking at the kind of sleazier age and kind of, I mean, the one underlying theme, I suppose, to an extent you could look at, is kind of hinting at kind of the evolution of the porn industry. Because in X, we're kind of looking at this, the kind of the start of the golden age, and probably that's going to be continued in Maxine as well. But here you kind of see we get the underground scene, the birth of the kind of the stag stuff, and the projectionist is kind of showing this to Pearl. That is one theme, I suppose. But what I love is the fact it's come back to that underlying, that love letter to the golden era of Hollywood. Like there's a sequence pretty early on, and we always say it's spoilerific and spoilers at this stage in the pod. But there's it's not I suppose you could call it a dream sequence involving a scarecrow that kind of starts out as this kind of Ginger Rogers kind of dance sequence-esque, and then, if you pardon the pun, kind of finishes up in much more of an orgasmic frenzy, and it goes to somewhere you don't necessarily expect it to go, and that kind of hints at kind of this underlying sense of kind of the desires that lie within Pearl and her wish to kind of get out of the situation. As a protagonist, or antagonist, whatever way you want to frame her, I think she's a pretty relatable character. I don't want to say I'm going to turn round and kind of, go off on an axe killing frenzy, but that sense of being stuck, or also, I was saying this in the TV show, I mean, it's 1918 and she wants to be a dancer on TV. I mean, you could easily relate that and substitute that out now in 2023 with someone who wants to be, and this is me showing my references, Nick, who wants to be on the X Factor, who wants to be on that age, that sense of entitlement of success. I want to be famous. I have a right to it. I'm prepared to work for it, but it's mine. I just have to seize that opportunity. It's a pretty relatable film. That's the things that I like. I come back to what I mentioned when we had you guys on talking about Scream. I like it when there's depth and there's layers there. I like it when there's things you can unpack and there's more than just get that guy or hit that guy in the back of the head with an axe, etc., etc. Pearl herself is a more terrifying character, not by what she does, but in kind of how she feels. And I come back to that sense. For me, anyway, she's quite terrifyingly relatable. I don't know, Nicole, John, take of that is you may be both terrified by that little revelation from myself, but I don't know. Am I right? Am I wrong? That's just something for me. I've seen this film twice now, and I find her character very relatable without my desires for wanting to commit murder.
Yeah, I would agree with that. actually rewatched the monologue scene earlier on YouTube, and I wrote down a couple of the quotes that really stood out to me. And one of them is, "Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and the fear washes over me, because what if this is it? What if this is right where I belong?" And that, the entire monologue, but that bit in particular, it made her a real person in a way that I don't know that I felt like she was before that. Like, there were glimpses of that, but I felt like that monologue really solidified not just that she is some kind of crazed killer, but that she is somebody that actually personifies a lot of fears and anxieties that a lot of people have, and just releases it in a potentially very unhealthy way.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think your psychiatrist is going to be recommending it.
No.
And if your psychiatrist is recommending it, you need to change your psychiatrist. That's all I'm going to say. You don't go to the bargain basement kind of psychiatrist for that type of advice. You pay a little bit extra. But John, I kind of went off in that kind of ramble and that rant where I said, what works for me is that sense that I empathize and I can sympathize with the character of Pearl. And that's nothing new in horror. We've seen that before. And I'm sure you'll both come up with references when I throw that out. But I mean, we have seen that before. But it's just something, maybe I haven't seen it for a while. And maybe it's a character like Pearl is on this back of, I don't want to say elevated horror when we were talking about last week, but kind of new things within the horror genre for that idea of playing with the idea of the final girl and just female representation within the horror genre. I threw a lot of things at you, John. Go with it.
Well, on the empathy and sympathy front, I definitely thought Pearl was a more empathetic and sympathetic character in X. I know that's going to sound weird, but it's whenever we're witnessing her retrospective look at her failures and regrets and fears that's already happened, she becomes this really pitiful character. And there's a lot of interesting things that we can examine about her there. But then I rewatched Pearl again today, and I got a reading that framed her more as a petulant child, because the whole film is shot in this very expressionistic way. It feels very much as like this is Pearl's understanding of the world, her view of the world. The world isn't this vibrant. There's a pandemic going on, there's horrors going on, and the world is in chaos. But you get this very demented Disney flick aesthetic where everything is bright and colourful and wonderful looking. And the only time we really break away from that vibrancy and expressionistic tone is during the monologue, where we start seeing darker colours, more natural colours. Reality begins to seep in. It's the one time she's a person. But that monologue puts me off quite a lot. It's, I think the film, I've got issues with it, but once the camera stops moving, I begin having issues. But whatever, what was going on? Sympathetic and empathetic, it's just, I think Pearl broke the mystique of X for me a bit too much. And, her unknowingly going through these failures and regrets and fears, stuff that she will later butcher people over in X. The empathy and sympathy was kind of lost for me. And I'm interested to see what will happen the next time I watch X.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make. I mean, it's the idea, the David Lynch idea, not everything in this world needs to be explained. Can't we have some mystique? Can't we have some kind of... Not everything needs to be spelled out to you. And I get that. I do get that. And I what I like about, come back to that point about the problems with prequels, is the fact that it's not really trying to set up and I suppose, yes, it is foreshadowing the events of X, but it's not really trying to feed into that. It is, to an extent, trying to do its own thing. And then, of course, then we've talked about this, spoilers, in the closing frames of the film, her husband returns from war, and of course Pearl is delighted. And I think one of the greatest sequences I can remember in cinema for quite some time, that those closing credits over Mia Goth's demented grin, Joaquin Phoenix, whatever you're going to do with Joker, whatever it'll do, will never ever come close to that. Nicole, do you want to pick up just kind of what myself and John have talked about there?
Yeah, I think I would be slightly more inclined to agree with you than John. Sorry, John.
I'll never worry about it. I'm very much in the minority with my view of her.
I feel like there's enough room between, not literal year, because it's only been a year since X came out, but in terms of the chronology of the films, there's enough time in between that I don't fully understand how Pearl gets from where she ends in Pearl to where we see her in X. And I think that room leaves a decent amount of mystique that I don't necessarily need filled in. I'm sure my imagination can do enough of that filling in, but I do still one of the issues that I had with Pearl was that I didn't think that she was a particularly sympathetic character. I know we have the what is the Fleetwood Mac song called? Why have I forgotten what it's called? Landslide. The very sad landslide moment that I think is kind of more hokey and annoying than sad in X, but I didn't find her particularly sympathetic because I thought that film leaned too far into hagsploitation for her to be super sympathetic. Whereas with Pearl, I think because the entire film is from her perspective, and it's much easier to put ourselves in her, hopefully not her literal position, but to understand where she's coming from, and potentially feel a lot of the frustrations that she's also felt with her mother and her father, and the fact that Howard's away to war. I felt for her a lot more in Pearl than I did in X. Yeah.
I would agree with you because I think she's more rounded as a character, but I think you've hit the nail on the head though, Nicole. It's the fact that it's not her story, essentially. In X, we're coming at it from different point of views, and it's other people reacting to her. Here, it's very much coming back, and you've both kind of alluded to this. It's her point of view. It's her view of the world. Her view that she's oppressed by her mother. Her mother wants to hold her back. As I say, it's quite kind of Carrie-esque in that sense. She's caring for her father. Her husband's away to war, and what I find relatable from me point of view, her escape is cinema. Her escape is, you can kind of go kind of full kind of Taxi Driver in that sense. She goes off her little way. Okay, she does drink morphine when she's there. I haven't went that far. I usually get pick a mix and a bottle of water. I've never done morphine just yet, right? Yeah, I'm 40. I might need kicks by the time I get 50. But I love that sense of that's her escape from her own horrors. And then, of course, she dreams to be a movie star. Haven't we all? And yeah, then you kind of don't know what way it's going to go. And then there's that great big sequence where it's a great big musical number when she's performing and she's like, that's the best dancing I ever did do. And it's like, sorry, we want somebody else. Get out of here. And then it's her sister, isn't it her sister-in-law?
Sister-in-law, yeah.
Yeah, sister-in-law. It's like, I'm very nicey, friendly. Actually, I got the cake. And that just sends poor old Pearl into a bit of a rage. But yeah, again, I don't know. I mean, where do we want to go? I guess it's like we talked about Scream the last time I had you both on. It's quite easy to kind of go on what we want to kind of discuss in that sense. Is there anything particular you guys want to talk about in relation to Pearl? And I mentioned this earlier on, that sense of not elevated horror, but it kind of follows that sense of trying to do different things within women in horror, and that I think is something I think Ty West has to be commended. But I come back to the point, I'd love to really know what Mia Goth's involvement from the because I just think she's a fantastic performer.
I have listened to a couple of other podcast reviews of Pearl, and in one of them, I think it was Horror Queers possibly, they mentioned that Mia Goth collaborated on the plot with Ty West, and then she would write scenes and then he would read over things and correct and make adjustments, because obviously she's not a trained screenwriter or anything. So
he would mansplain how that's not now going to work. That's not going to,
yeah. So I think she did a good chunk. I don't know how much exactly, but I think she actually did more than you would maybe assume that just an actor in a film that gets a writing credit would have done. I think she did quite a bit of character work, as well as actually writing physical things that are on the page. Yeah,
that's why I'm intrigued, because her character feels much more fleshed out when I come back to it, she feels very real, which I think will both work for the film and work against the film, because I know, coming back to James Oliver, who we had on the telly show talking about this a couple of weeks ago, he wasn't a fan. He wasn't a fan of it. It didn't work for him. I kind of guessed that, because I know he didn't like X. Maybe he's just not destined to be a Ty West fan, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. You're entitled to your opinion. I always say that. Sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong, though. I don't know. I would say this, though. Take Maya Goth's performance away. I don't know how much of the film is what I like about is her and what she brings. And I know she's involved in we've mentioned she's involved in the screenplay, so you'd be taking quite a bit. I don't know how much I love the film as much if I would pay to watch her read the phone book. In the same sense, Nicole, I'm sure you would pay to watch Sharon Stone read the phone book. I would pay happily to see it, because I think she's a performer, and we're going to be talking about her a couple of weeks in time in her performance in Daniel Cronenberg's latest film. I love her. I genuinely do. Maybe not in the same sense that you love Sharon Stone, Nicole, but I just think she brings something to that performance. I come back, that closing scene, those closing credits. It's the whole idea of show me everything without telling me anything. And I know it's the closing credits, so you can't really, but oh my God, terrifying, but also very relatable. So John, again, I threw a lot of stuff out there. Take with it as what you wish.
I'm just I've seen the film twice now, and neither time I could connect with the character. I just feel so detached from the performance and detached from the character and detached from the framing of the film. Because again, this is, for me, it's very much, we're not watching her perspective, we're watching her delusion, pretty much, which is a perspective, but it's kind of worked. So I'm taking much more of a backseat approach as a critic than I normally would. So, I honestly don't think it's the performance. I do think it's the character and the framing of the character which leaves me so detached.
Mm-hmm.
But I just couldn't get into it.
That's fine. No, I mean, as I said, that's fine. I mean, I don't think this film will be for everyone. It clearly hasn't been. You haven't been a massive fan of it. I know James was really not a fan of it. I think he only watched the whole entirety of the film because he knew he was going to be reviewing it with us. He said himself, if he hadn't been, he'd have probably switched it off. And I don't know. I mean, I like the fact that it's not just kind of tried and tested, cliched horror stuff. Because that's, as much as I enjoy that, it's not what I want all the time. And I like it when someone's trying to do something different. And I think at least they're trying to, it's coming back to, we were talking about Scream before, and it seems like I'm obsessed and I want to keep talking about that series with you two, but Scream 6 is quite hollow, and I don't know if there's it exists because box office numbers demand that it exists. I get a sense with Pearl, whether it worked or not, it's come from a rather organic place. I mean, they've sat there, they've made X, they've said, oh, maybe there's another story to be told. What about this? We have this old kind of dungy farmhouse. Let's do it up with a lick of paint. Kind of John Carpenter-esque for the opening of Halloween. Let's make it all nice and shiny and new and go back and kind of it's kind of like the Halloween thing. Kind of, you're going back to the scene of the crime from the start. Okay, Carpenter did that in what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and made it kind of terrifying with a child killing his sister. But yeah, for me, what I like is the fact the film feels it's a prequel. Yes, that usually is a tick lost for me, but it's coming from a place I think organic and natural. There's an attempt to do something. I don't know if Maxine will be the same, because I think it's now that sense, we've got 2 movies, let's make it a trilogy, because everything needs to be a trilogy now. You know,
wasn't it planned out as a trilogy from the start? I think it might have been. Like they had planned to do 3 films.
Because I know with Pearl, they had a couple of weeks where they were isolating because they were filming during COVID, and they were like, we have time, why don't we just make a movie? But I'm not actually sure if it was intended the entire time, because Maxine's obviously taking a lot more time, because they didn't just bang that one out really quickly. So I'm not sure
Like X and
exactly
Pearl
what.
were shot back to back, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Maxine, to me, I remember reading something about this a long time ago, but I could be mistaken. But I thought that they had at least plotted out the direction of a trilogy. Not exactly the specifics, but it was going to be singular film, prequel, sequel, in that order.
I don't
No
know.
idea.
I don't know. I
I
know,
could be
as I
misremembering it.
say, I do remember the sense that going back to the days of lockdowns, they were there and they kind of had that idea, and they were like, well, we've got the time, as you mentioned, we can flesh this out and do something with it. And that's why I like it, the fact that it does feel so different. It doesn't just feel like okay, we're going to do the same kind of thing that we did with X. It feels very different, and that's why I commend it. As I say, I don't think it's perfect. It's what film is perfect these days, but it's not cinematic perfection by any means. But I commend what they're trying to do and trying to do something a little bit different. And as I say, I'll always pay to go see Mia Goth in pretty much anything. I've had the pleasure to interview her twice over the years, many years ago for The Survivalist, and I can't remember the name of the film. It was in Edinburgh. It was the film with George McKay she did, and I apologise. It was by the writer of The Orphanage. Apologies.
Well, Cure for Wellness, was it?
No,
No.
because I did not like A Cure for Wellness. I did not like that film, but isn't that Gore Verbinski?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yes, I think so.
That's Gore Verbinski trying to show his horror credentials and feeling horribly and creating
Miserably.
something. I think creating something that's like 2.5 hours, quite long and dull as dishwater. And you're like, nah, you're all right, Gore. Just go back and make more Pirates films. I'll find the name of the film and I'll put it in the credits. It's on previous podcasts somewhere. She's a performer that thinks about what she's doing. And you see that. So we've talked about Maxine. I mean, are we excited by the thought of this becoming a trilogy? I would not be surprised if it ends up being a quintology or a quadrilogy, because there's enough of a gap. So this is 1918 with Pearl, 1979 we have with X. I think X or Maxine's going to be set directly in the aftermath, maybe a few years afterwards. It's following on from her journey and she's like, I'm going to be a fucking star. And you're like, yes you are. Yes you will be. That's carrying on from that, but they've left enough of a gap. I don't know if that's a conscious thing or a kind of cynical filmmaker thing, because there's stuff in X isn't explained. I mean, there's a car. We kind of, because Howard kind of comes back, but I think he becomes much clearly between that time and the 70s become much more kind of, they've become a duo in this, in their kind of killing escapades. The cynical part of me thinks they will probably go back and revisit Pearl's character, because why stop? Why, if anything, if franchises have taught us anything, why stop with just 3? Hey, we're getting the new Exorcist movie, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Didn't David Gordon Green, he did so well with the Halloween trilogy, with his attempts. I'll not go down. And it's not because I hate Halloween Ends. I don't. That's not the one I don't like. It's Halloween Kills. It's the pointless one. But let's not talk about that. We're talking about Pearl, and we're talking about X. So, John, I mean, you've had mixed feelings. You kind of like X, weren't fussed on Pearl. Are you excited then? Are you looking forward? Are you intrigued for what we might see with Maxine?
Well, one thing I should say is everything you were saying there before about Pearl, I do agree with completely. Like the originality of it and stuff.
Mm.
But Maxine, I'm fascinated to see where they would go, because to me, again, I see the 2 films that we have as playing with 2 very different things, one being theme and one being aesthetic. So I'm wondering, what could be played with in Maxine? What would be that major focus? And I'm fascinated to see what it is. I'll be there open night. Could be a very could be playing with sound quite a lot. It's that the promotional material makes it look like it's very 80s, very mid-80s. A lot of wonderful sound design that could be played with. That little teaser we got hit with at the end of X, the preacher father. Fascinated to see where that goes.
I guess that's the beauty of a sequel. You can go off and you can do whatever you want. It's the problem coming back to the prequel. No matter how far back you go, you know where you're eventually going to end up. I made that point before. It is the problem. It's the prequel problem. Unless you kind of go off and you really try to do something different, which 9 out of 10 times they don't. But anyway, I mean, Nicole, for yourself, intrigued with Maxine?
I am tentatively excited for it. I will see it. My only real thing is that Maxine, I felt with X, there was a lot of Maxine telling herself she was a star, and I felt like the film was trying to tell me she was a star, and I didn't necessarily feel that because I don't actually know who Maxine is outside of that. And maybe this film will do a really good job of explaining to me who she is. But as it stands, I guess the possibilities are endless with her, kind of like what John was saying.
My key question, though, Nicole, is you didn't think Maxine, or you weren't certain Maxine was a star. What's your thoughts on Pearl? Do you think Pearl's a star? Clearly she's not, because she's not what they want, not what the dancing crew wanted. They want something completely different. But do you think she was a star?
I actually really liked that scene in Pearl because she's not terrible and she's not fantastic. She's just fine. And
Isn't that what we want in life? Just something, everything just to be fine.
I just thought it was really funny that she had these real delusions of grandeur, and she's not even terrible. Like, usually you would find out that like, whenever you watch like X Factor or something and somebody opens their mouth and they're horrific, like, usually we tend to want one of the extremes, but she's just okay. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with what she was doing. She just was fine. And they wanted a blonde. And I find that really funny. I don't know why. That didn't really answer the question. I guess she is a star in my mind.
She can be whatever she wants to be.
Yes. I think Pearl gives Mia Goth a lot more to do. I will say I'm slightly Mia Gothed out at the minute because I watched Infinity Pool maybe through some of the
that would be an ecumenical matter. We can't discuss this.
I watched Infinity Pool one night, then the next day watched X and Pearl back to back, and I found her so annoying in Infinity Pool that I just take from her. Fantastic. She's great. She can do whatever she wants.
Yeah, exactly. Mia Goth is a star. Pearl might not be, Maxine might not be, but Mia Goth definitely is. And I guess, I know we are going to wrap this up pretty quickly on this pod, but coming back to, I do love the kind of the mother-daughter relationship in this. I know it's a tried and tested kind of horror, kind of cliche, but I love that. And coming back, just because you mentioned the dance sequence, I love that little scene at the end where she's been rejected, but in her head she sees her mum. And it's her mum is kind of telling her kind of, no, next, you're not what we want. Again, just a little thing, a little nod. But I like that dynamic. Again, that's that whole sense of fleshing out a character, putting meat on the bones, as in just being more than just, I want to be a star.
Yeah, I like that bit too. I find it really interesting. The fact that her mum is German, I also find quite interesting. Obviously, it's set during the First World War, so there was a lot of anti-German sentiments going about at the time. And I think that there had been a lot of Germans emigrated to America around, like in the last 50 years prior to that. So I think there were a lot of anti-German sentiments going around even before that, just about immigration. So I thought that was a really interesting point to add in. And then there's obviously the fact that the people who are casting the dance thing that she wants to do are specifically looking for a blonde girl, kind of all American sort of thing that Pearl really doesn't fit into. I just find all of that really interesting, and that her mum tries to stifle all of that because she doesn't want her to be disappointed. Kind of, she doesn't go about it the right way. She's very mean, but it's almost about protecting Pearl through not very nice ways, I guess.
Yeah, and you also you've kind of set something off in my head. I'm just thinking back when I watched the film. There's that scene as well, because it's been a week or so since I last watched Pearl, where her mother and they're having the exchange about kind of, I want to go off and I want to do this, go to this dance recital. I want to get to this competition. And her mum's like, no, you don't do that. It's like, I've seen what you do, Pearl. you scare me. And it's that sense of, again, it's adding a little bit of layer, a little bit of dynamic. The fact that in her way, I don't know, is her mum not only trying to protect her daughter, but knowingly protect other people from what she's seen. And that adds, it's little exchanges like that, I think, make Pearl more terrifying than maybe other things that she does. I mean, she's not very nice to, is it a goose? Is it goose, I think, right in the early? God help him. He just happens to kind of waddle in, and next thing he knows, he's been fed to a crocodile. Yeah,
The goose was trying to steal her spotlight with all that honking.
Yeah, bastard. damn old goose. But no, I love that. I would love a little bit more of the kind of relationship between the mother and daughter in this. I think it's the balance is there. It's just, but I mean, that's just one little scene I love. Not seeing this, like the mother, she goes, I've seen you about the farm, Pearl. I know what you do. I know kind of some things. It scares me. You'd be better not doing that. And part of you, is she protecting her daughter, or is she trying to do her best to protect the rest of the world from what her daughter could potentially do? I don't know. Your thoughts on that? I'll come to you first, John.
Well, the fascinating thing there is, despite the fact that Pearl and her mother can, well, at least understand two languages, because I don't know if Pearl can actually speak German, but you can at least understand it. They can talk to each other, communicate like that, but they can't actually understand each other. They can't make that connection. They can't communicate. And the film shows lots of attempts, but neither of them actually try. I really feel like the mother is Pearl's tether to reality, the one person that can smack her down from the dreams of grandeur, but you can't smack her out of the sociopathy. Just being a repressed parent of that era, we will let that slide. She's torturing young animals, but we'll let that slide. We will continue with our farmhand existence.
And she sees how she acts around her father as well. I mean, some of the stuff that gives me the real creeps. I actually love that little scene. And it's not just, I mean, my own father, God rest him, had a stroke, and Dad was able to talk and could roar and shout and expletive laden, whatever you needed. But I mean, there's stuff, that sense of, I think it's when they're having, does he ever get bathed? Because every time they go, would you go and bath your father? And she's like, she seems to have the bath, and he just seems to sit there. And I guess there's a plot point there in the sense, but like going, has he ever been washed? Has he ever been cleaned? But there's a scene where she's just kind of like running her hand. I think she nips him to kind of see if she can get a reaction. And then she's like, are you even there? And kind of like the way I think she put her finger in his mouth to kind of see, is like to gauge a reaction in the sense. Just little things like that. I mean, you're talking about how she treats animals on the farm, how she treats her own father, and her mother witnesses that as well.
That's her escalation, going from small animal to, can I do this to a human?
Yeah. And also there's a scene with the projectionist going, where he pretty much goes, you're terrifying me. You're terrifying. Like, yeah, I'd be pretty terrified too. And hey, how ungrateful are they? We haven't even mentioned the poor old pig. Poor old gift of a pig. And just allowed to go to waste, just to rot like Pearl's own feelings. I guess there's symbolism there. Both of you are maybe more cine literate than me. Maybe you want to unpack that kind of metaphor that we have there. Nicole, anything you want to pick up on what I've rambled through there?
The thing that I kind of wanted to mention was kind of coming off the back of what both of you were saying about the way that Pearl communicates with other people. And it's not just her mum that she has this like disconnect with, it the projectionist as well, like that scene where he notices that she's not quite right, and he just kind of is like, okay, bye, and he's not rude to her necessarily, but he just knows that something is off and just wants to get away, and she can't take that, and she just seems to want honesty from him, but he doesn't want to give it because he's scared of what she might do, and there is that disconnect there of she can't openly communicate the way that she necessarily needs to because that scares other people. And it seems like no matter what, people aren't going to be able to relate to her because she's not like everyone else. I think
Because
she
she's a
actually
star. Because she's a star.
Exactly.
That's why.
But yeah, I just find that that whole thing interesting about because he's not overtly horrible to her in any way, but there is, throughout a lot of their interactions, there's kind of an underlying dodginess of, does he just want to fuck her? Is that all that is? And clearly it is. Like, he, in their second meeting, he shows her porn. So I feel like it's pretty clear.
I always wait to the third. That's
Plus, as well, the way he stands behind her as it happens, very hips thrusted forward.
Yeah.
It's
all very uncomfortable, but it's not overt. And it's just, I find it interesting, like, even going through the people that she kills, like the sister-in-law doesn't actually do anything wrong to her. For the most part, she's really lovely to her. But even the fact that her and her mum come with this pig to present to them, and they say that they're going around other people to deliver pigs. There's all of this. The people who she kills technically haven't actually done anything to deserve it, but there is just an underlying sinisterness. That's not a word, but about every person that she kills. I guess that there's an idea that they want to use her, or they think that they're better than her in some way, and it almost justifies, obviously doesn't actually, but almost, you kind of get why she's doing everything that she's doing, even if it's not overt or explicit.
It's wrong, but you can see how it makes sense in her head, and I don't know why it's popped into my head. I'm kind of thinking of connections to, like, Serial Mom, in that sense of someone similar. It might not be the right thing to do, but it makes sense to that person. Serial Mom, a completely different film to Pearl, very different kind of levels, but it's a film I love, and I haven't watched it for some time, and now it's popped into my head. I really do want to watch it, but kind of in my head, that's kind of what I'm thinking, and the kind of that connection between, it just pops into my head there, so it's a half-formed thought. I apologise, but that sense of the injustices, they are injustices to her on a personal level, but they might probably seem completely insignificant to anybody else. I don't know anything at this stage. We are going to wrap it up. I've said that about 10 minutes ago, but do you anything you want to throw out for Pearl before we kind of bring this pod to a close, John, Nicole?
Well, bringing it back to the pig there, the pig to me feels really much like there's something rotten in the state of Denmark kind of moment. It's that rotting piece of meat that everyone can see. It's out in the open, but no one will actually address it. It's really the decline of the narrative, the mental state getting ready to collapse. And then just to address the victimization thing, I think that also ties into it. Because the people that Pearl kills, in my reading of it anyway, are the people that disrupt her sense of reality, disrupt this delusion. The mother keeps smacking her down. She can't live her reality if the father exists, because she has to care for him. The projectionist isn't going to take her away to Europe. That delusion is killed the second she realizes, I'm being left behind here. The sister-in-law is potentially going to be a star, even if she didn't get the role, even if in Pear's head she got the role, whether she did or didn't, so she had to die. And then I really think that continues forever until her inevitable death in the 1970s. Anyone who tries to tell her no, somebody who tries to bring her back to earth, anyone who tries to point out the rotten pig has to go.
Well, I think to an extent, I mean, this is why, since they have left it so open, there's so much space, I think by the time we get to X, there's that sense of her time has passed. She will not be a star, and there's that angry, and there's that, it's not just kind of the naivety of youth, but the anger, was it the life is wasted, what is it, what's that phrase, life is
wasted on the young.
Life is wasted on the young, that sense, and we see that Pearl is so angry and kind of in her own mortality, in her own body, that, you know, she has to kind of, like, with that scene with Maxine, when she kind of is in the bed and just wants to touch her skin and compare to what her body has become, and that anger that she has at herself. Yeah, I agree with you, definitely, but I think by the time we reach X, that anger and that homicidal tendency has evolved into something else. And I think that's, again, coming back to that point, it's why I like Pearl.
Right.
in that sense, it's not just laying the foundations for that. It's saying that these homicidal tendencies, they may have started as something else, but this is what they've matured into. And hey, maybe it's all Howard's fault. That's all I could say. He had to go, because they make the point, he could have got out of going to war, but he went to war. So technically, it's all the man's fault. So there we go. That is the meaning of Pearl. The definition, men. I don't know. It's a better version of explaining it than Alex Garland did with men. But let's not go on that. Let's not pull on that thread. I think we shall bring this pod to a close. I think generally, although you're down on it, John, I think there's positives for you for Pearl as well. I'm
very appreciative of it. I do. See, the thing is, it just didn't connect with me. I didn't connect with the text, but I appreciate everything it does. I love the symbolism in it. I love a lot of the visual stuff, and it just wasn't quite for me. But I would gladly give me money for future Ty West projects based on these two films I've seen. And not watch them through dubious online ways. No, I will have to I'll have to watch the next one 3 times in the cinema to make up for it. There you go. Ty, if you're listening, we've got your back. And just kind of as we draw to a close, Nicole, any just for you, just last thoughts generally?
I think the one thing, if we were to get some kind of sequel to Pearl, prequel to X, I would kind of like to see something that explored her relationship to sex a bit more, because we get hints of it in Pearl. We get obviously the projectionist showing her the porn videos. They obviously have a sexual relationship, and that's the crux of her characterization in X. And you didn't even mention. You just completely didn't even mention the scarecrow sequence. Oh, I forgot. How can you forget that? How can you forget that? So, yes, so we have that stuff, but all of that is like the first half of the film, and then we go into I'm a Star and all of that, and I just would like that narrative thread picked up, because I would like to understand how that kind of confusing relationship that she has with sex and desire, and like in the monologue, she says something about how she realizes that she didn't actually want other men. It was just that Howard wasn't there. Yeah. But then in X, she wants everybody to fuck her. So how do we get from A to B? In X, does she? Is it not a sense? Now it's been a couple of weeks since I watched X, but is it not a sense? Doesn't Howard have a heart attack and he feels like he can't? That's true. Actually, he keeps telling her I can't. Yeah. Because he thinks it's going to happen again if it's an interesting plot point that you make. I as I say, I don't think necessarily she wants. I don't know whether she does the things that she does in X to get his attention. To kind of, I don't know. It is a plot point. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole lot of prequels. We could have a lot of prequels, but yeah. It's whether or not a filmmaker. Well, here's the thing. I don't think it would be. I would say that could be something that would interest a filmmaker, interest a performer, but it's whether or not a producer's going to say, "Well, yeah, but could you just go off and make stuff? The way you only had one alligator in the last film. Put about 10. Put about 10 alligators. Let's do a prequel where we talk about how the alligator got to be so fucking angry in those films. That's what kids want these days. They don't want to hear horror films that explores women's relationships with sex. I'd pay to see that happily. And that sounds, and it said that far too upbeat and happily, so it makes me sound like a creep, like the projectionist who's going to turn round and say, "Here, do you want to watch a wee horror film about sex? Sex." I did genuinely mean that in the sense of I would be interested in seeing that, not I would be interested in seeing that. Just to clarify. I would agree. Yeah. We're going to see so many alligator reboots of those creature features from the 80s. I think one was actually called Gator or Alligator, was it? Yeah, I think so. That's what the kids want these days. That's what they want. Yeah. So I think on that alligator themed note, we shall bring this pod to a close. So, yeah, I think mixed feelings about Pearl, but I think still the whole idea of this podcast, is it more than pixels on a screen? I think it is.
I think it's more than just stuff on a screen. There's at least an attempt to do something, and I think we're all here. We know that Maxine's got her money, and if they decide to make it a quadrilogy, quintology, 10, if they go into kind of Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, kind of in terms of number of sequels, who knows how many they could go out with this. I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see. All that's left for me to do now is thank my two guests. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you so much for having me again.
And thank you very much, Nicole.
And thank you for having me again as well.
Thanks to Sharon Stone for asking us to have you back on. Hopefully she'll get in touch again and we'll get you both on. She might even mention you the next time, John. I don't know. But Sharon specifically said get Nicole on. That's all I can say. So look, that's all from us. I've been your host, Jim McLean. We'll be back soon with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.